So hi, welcome listeners. Afsheen here, joined again by Vicki Tabitashvili, my friend, my co-host, my co-conspirator, and all those things. So Vicki and I are having a really important conversation today that is very close to Vicki's heart. I know that we only talk about things that are close to our hearts, but this time this is a topic that really Vicki felt we had to cover today, and I am so in agreement with her that this is a topic that we need to talk about and probably doesn't even get enough airtime. So we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. Vicki, I am so excited to hear what it is that feels so important about this topic to you, as this is your topic of choice, and I'm so excited to unpack this with you. So shall we begin?
Well, welcome everybody. Happy New Year. And we're kicking off the new year with a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, the imposter syndrome. The reason that I wanted us to delve into this is because this is something that I absolutely have struggled and still do struggle with sometimes. But more importantly, this is a topic that has been coming up with a lot of my colleagues at work, with my coaching clients. And I noticed that a lot of the leaders that are just stepping into a leadership role, it is something that comes up for them very often, because you're going through that transition of maybe having been an individual contributor. Now you're being elevated in the organization, you're getting a lot more visibility, and the more that you're getting invited to those senior level conversations, the more of that imposter syndrome can come up, where you're asking yourself, wait a minute, do I really belong at the table? Wait a minute, do I really belong in this conversation? And so I really wanted to open this up and for us to have a very candid discussion around this. Now, before we jump in, I wanted to share with you that I did some research, and what I uncovered is that sometime in our career, at least 70% of people in the workforce struggle with the imposter syndrome. So the very first thing that I really want to shine a light on is that if this is you, you are not alone. And this is something that everyone, no matter where you are in the organization, struggles with. There's a beautiful quote that I found by Sheryl Sandberg. And she said, "Some mornings I still feel like a fraud." And I thought that that was so powerful, that even a woman who is the COO of Meta, one of the most influential organizations that is out there today, she is being vulnerable enough to share with us that even she feels like a fraud. And the imposter syndrome truly is when we feel like a fraud. I will pause here because I've done a lot more research, but Afsheen, I want to get your lens on this, your perspective, and really let's unpack what's behind the imposter syndrome, and then more importantly, how do we help you overcome that imposter syndrome? And I will share some of my own personal stories as well as part of that, in addition to some of the research that I've done.
Yay!
To you.
I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to sort of contribute to this this thinking that you've been doing on this topic. And I think you said something that was really interesting. You said this is often the case when you're moving from individual contributor to the next level. And then you shared Sheryl Sandberg's example. And so what's important for me is that it's not just at that level, actually. And you're right, 70% of people are actually experiencing this, and they are at various levels in the organization. So you are never alone in this journey, because many, if not all of us, are at some stage in our careers, any stage in our careers, experiencing imposter syndrome. So this might not be the first time you overcome it. If that's the journey that you're on, you might actually be surprised to see it again as you continue on. So it's really important to know you're not alone, and that even the most excellent people, even at the most senior levels, will go through this at multiple times in their careers. And I think that was really important to sort of articulate and to put out there. And the other thing, I think that, Vicki, as I was sharing with you earlier, is I host this book club, the Leadership Book Club. And this month, the book that we are reading is Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And she speaks to the never good enough feeling that also contributes to imposter syndrome. Is we may not feel good enough to be at the table. We may not feel qualified enough, skilled enough, experienced enough, educated enough, whatever that is, that not enough. We may feel that, and that may lend to our feeling of imposter syndrome. And one of the things that she shares that really stuck with me was, and I'd like to ask anybody who's listening to this conversation to reflect on this one, because it's had me reflecting a lot recently, is these types of feelings, these types of narratives that come up in our heads, am I good enough, are often driven by the unwanted identity that we are trying to avoid. Just have a think about that. What is the unwanted identity that you're trying to avoid that is fueling this feeling of not being good enough? Are you trying to avoid the identity of being a failure at a specific job? If it is that unwanted identity that you are trying to avoid, then that fuels you're running from a place of fear. You're operating from a place of fear. And when you start operating from a place of fear, that feeds your never good enough feelings, and that feeds your imposter syndrome. So how can you try to operate from a more abundant space versus a fear space of I'm trying to avoid unwanted identity? I'm going to stop here because I know that's a really deep concept, and I could see that the wheels started to turn in Vicki's head as I was sharing that. So what comes up for you, Vicki, as I share that?
So Afsheen, I really love this point of abundance versus operating from a place of fear. And when I think abundance, I think love. And it's really love of ourselves, right? And the thing is that a lot of times when you do struggle with the imposter syndrome, it is because you have been a rising star in the organization and you're being given all of these new opportunities, all of this new visibility, right, to the more senior leaders in the organization. And most likely what got you there is because you were a perfectionist. It's because you were a high achiever. It is because you were someone who was going above and beyond the call of duty. And that is what is getting you all of this visibility and the accolades. And the flip side of that is that when we are a perfectionist, we expect the best of ourselves, and being good enough is just not good enough. And so I think that the imposter syndrome, or this feeling of like, I'm a fraud, it's because maybe you are at 80, 90% of what you need to know. And yet we have this unrealistic expectation of being at 110%. So there is something behind that being in the space of fear. I think the space of fear is that you fear that you're not at that 110%. And this almost makes me feel like there's a statistic that shows that women, when we look for a new job and we look at a job description, we will make sure that we fit the job description by 110%, not by 70%. And I feel like it's almost that same dynamic with the imposter syndrome. It's that if you don't feel like you fit the bill and that you're 110% as good as everybody else in the room, being at 80% is just not enough for you. So that is where I think that operating from a place of fear versus operating from a place of love also comes through. Some other things that I believe feed into and are behind the imposter syndrome sometimes could be just your upbringing, right? Let's say you've had parents who pushed you really, really hard. And instead of really celebrating your wins, it was always a focus on what you didn't do, that extra 5 or 10% that you didn't do. And I think that does go back to you building up these perfectionist tendencies, but that could stem not so much from your personality, but more so from your upbringing. And I do think that that sometimes contributes to the way that you tend to perceive yourself. If you had parents that pushed you extremely hard and you were almost conditioned to only be perfect and to be the best in the room. And then lastly, just innate self-worthiness and self-confidence, challenges that we all face, right? That's when we start to question ourselves, and there's that little voice in you, oh my God, what am I really good enough to be at this table? Am I making a smart point? Should I even ask that question? Am I rambling? Those are the types of questions that come up when we do have those self-worthiness and self-confidence issues come up for us. So I pause here. I want to get your take on what you think is behind the imposter syndrome, and then let's talk about what can we do to go from a place of fear into an energy of abundance.
One of the things that I got to thinking about when you mentioned the voice inside of you, which is again going back to some of the stuff that I've been reading, is there are basically 2 tapes that run side by side based on the research that Brene Brown has done on topics that influence a lot of what we're talking about today. And the first tape that we hear is not good enough, never good enough, right? But the second one, if we ever overcome the first one, which is, never good enough, have you done enough, was this perfect enough, are you the best fit enough, etc. But should you be of that level of self-confidence that you cross that, the second tape that plays immediately after that inner voice is, who do you think you are? Yeah, who do you think you are to be so confident? Who do you think you are to know that, that you belong here? Who do you think so there are these gremlins? So I think that it's really important to be conscious of these 2 steps. It's a 2-step. It's a 2-stage. It's 2 tapes that are playing one after the other. The first one that we tackle through self-awareness is, am I enough? And then the second one is, when the gremlins come in, is the how do I deal with the who do you think you are question. And there's a really interesting poem that was written by a writer and was also quoted by Nelson Mandela. And the writer is Marianne Williamson. And it is on this topic. And if you agree, I'm going to read that out. And then we can
yes, please do.
If it doesn't fit. But really the poem says, it speaks to this piece around who do you think you are. This is what Marianne Williamson says in her poem that I have found so moving that I have actually shared it with a lot of people that have experienced similar moments in their lives, to remind them that they are more than enough and then some. So here it goes. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant and gorgeous and talented and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory that is within us. it's not just in some of us, it is in all of us. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence liberates others.
So perfect, so beautiful. Afsheen, I think that's exactly it. It is, it goes back to this notion of when you have the courage to be authentic and vulnerable. And I know that Brene Brown speaks to that too. What you're doing is you're giving others the permission and the space to be vulnerable and authentic and their true selves as well. And there's this beautiful book, it's called The Law of One. And it says that when you heal you, or what you do for you, you're doing for everyone else. And so I think that this all ties together really beautifully into this notion of you are so worthy and so deserving, but it is only when you are in that energy of knowing that you're worthy and that you're all powerful that you create and give the permission to others to be the same. Yeah. So I love you weaving that in.
Thank you for letting me weave that in, on a more practical base, on a more practical front. I've been there. I remember in my corporate career, somewhere in the middle of my corporate career, I was once rated one of the top 5% of in performance of the entire organization, and it was a 50,000 plus people organization, so you can imagine the amount of pressure that I felt at that time. I was very young when I received such an accolade, and I was not at all mentally prepared. I didn't have the wisdom of the ages that I've gathered along the way, and I was really unprepared for it. And the year that followed was the hardest year of my life. Imagine. And the reason it was so hard for me was because I kept asking myself, what did I do to deserve this? Right? And how am I going to keep it up? And at every step along the way, throughout that year, I kept thinking, is this enough? Is this enough? Did I do enough? And it was, what got in my way was me, right? And I think by having this conversation, what we're trying to do is help others not get in their own way, but rather to have the tools and the wisdom and the skills to sort of shortcut that. When you do well, thrive in it. Take it. Now I've learned to take it. I'm like, I'll take that. Sure, that's me, right? And not be so tough on myself when I don't understand something, when I'm at a table around, with a group of professionals just like myself, to beat myself up and say, I didn't get what was being said there or what's happening here. Or rather getting curious, rather being empathetic to myself and saying, I'm learning here, rather having a learning mindset. I'm learning here, what am I learning? Rather than being my own worst critic. I'm going to stop here. I know I've shared a lot, Vicki, so would love to hear some of your suggestions on how to move forward in a much more empowered way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of times we fall into the trap of believing that when I have the title, I will be worthy, or I'm no longer a fraud. I'll share very vulnerably, I have the title, I have a seat at the table, and there are moments when I stay quiet in the room, and fear behind the silence is that I don't want to say something stupid. And so I almost have this philosophy of I'd rather say nothing than say something really dumb, right? Whereas that same dumb thought, what I'm judging as dumb, could be a really smart question or a smart insight. I think the fear of not knowing something, or the fear of coming across as not knowing something or sounding dumb, keeps me quiet in the room. And so for anybody that is in the room and that is feeling like, oh, well, I'm quiet because I don't have the title, I haven't earned my right yet. Even when you do have the title, and even when you do get the seat at the table, those moments can come up. Right? So let's give ourselves some grace when those moments do come up. And it's interesting. This just happened to me last week. I had been beating myself up about this for maybe 3 days now. And then I just the weekend came and I said, I just got to let it go. I can't stew in that moment. I just can't stew in it. So what do? A couple of things that you can do is, number one, when you are in that moment, or if you feel bad about something, allow it. Allow yourself to feel bad about it. It's okay. But then give yourself some grace. Everyone has a difficult moment. Everybody makes a faux pas. Everybody goes through something like that. And just understand that there are humans on the other side of it. So number one is give yourself some grace. Number two, remember that you got the seat at the table because you earned it and because you do deserve it. And that you do have a lot to celebrate, a lot of beautiful accomplishments. Trust me when I say you will not be invited to the conversation unless you had earned that right. So if you're being given the opportunity, it is because you have earned that opportunity. And try not to forget that. And instead of wallowing in that energy of fear, in that energy of lack of self-confidence, remember what got you here. Okay? That's number two. Number three is, can we be okay with being good enough instead of with being perfect and the absolute best in the room? Can we maybe sometimes be okay with that? Can we give ourselves some grace? And there are moments when someone else shines in the room, and there are moments when you shine in the room. And that's okay. Life, you and I, Afsheen, we did this whole conversation that it's not a competition. It's about completion. And there are going to be moments when your colleague is going to shine in the room. And it's not going to be you. You are not going to be the shining star. But that doesn't take away from your own greatness and who you are and what you have done to get here. So can you just be okay with that? And then lastly, I do believe in mentorship and coaching. And I think having that more mature, person in your life who can mentor and or coach you along in these circumstances, I think is tremendously valuable. So I pause here, Afsheen. What are your practical applications for somebody?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, especially on the last point. I think that as we don't feel alone, I think it's very important. And I think it's wonderful because we've gone full circle here. When we started, we were talking about how this happens to everyone, and it happens at various stages, and it's not like it's only going to be at this time in your life or once in your life or just you. No, it is a much more universal phenomenon than that. So it's so important for you to surround yourself with allies, with coaches, with mentors, and with buddies. Whatever, and one of the other things I always suggest is, if you are finding it a little bit daunting to be in the arena, as you were talking about, Vicki, in the early days, if you're finding it difficult to be in the arena in the early days, and it's fair, it's like, feel those feelings. It's fair. You're feeling those feelings. Acknowledge those feelings, and maybe find one or two allies in the arena who are there, who you can bounce ideas off of before the meeting that you're going to be participating in, or after, so you truly know that there are people at the table who see you, hear you, understand you, and so that you don't feel alone. And I know that in the early days for me, that was part of the way, if I was going to pitch something that was really critical to me, my function, and I believe to the business, but I also knew that there would be pushback from other stakeholders around the table, I always took the opportunity to speak to one or two stakeholders who I could relate to, who I trusted, who I felt comfortable with, and bounce ideas off of them so that I could know that when I went in there, I wasn't going in there alone. So sometimes that's the kind of work you can do in order to strengthen yourself for the arena, the new arenas you're facing. And the other thing is, I'm getting a little bit philosophical here, and I'm sorry about that, Vicki. But Theodore Roosevelt has said something, and I'm not going to share the entire quote of what he said. But here's what he said. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of the deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. So to me, and to all those people who are sitting around the table, I'm pretty sure that at least a few of them are thinking, this person has walked into the arena and they are willing to valiantly be here to create an impact. And to me, that's something to admire. And as long as you can hold that true to you, about you, that you stepped in and you did your best, then I really think that that will help you get out of your own way, address any imposter syndrome that you have, and move forward in an empowered way.
I love that. I think that's a really great reminder that life is not about failure. It's about how you respond to the failure. And it's your willingness to get up and to try it again. And I always use this example, but I think it's perfect. Edison, he failed 999 times. He really did, And, but the thing that sets him apart from others is that he didn't give up. And he kept going and he kept believing in his idea. So whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're in a large corporation, regardless of where you're at, failure is just part of success. We all fail on our path to success. And it's our willingness to get up and to keep going that sets us apart. So empower, I love that word, empowerment. So I love that.
Oh, Vicki, what a great conversation this is. I so appreciate that we meandered down, these paths in a way that even I feel more empowered having had this conversation. There's a lot of power in putting words to an experience and discussing that and normalizing that and putting ways to address that rather than hiding that. Because a lot of the times, and I remember moments when I was hiding my imposter syndrome. And when you hide something, it actually gets worse. But when you give it air and you give it a chance to breathe and we normalize it, it actually has less power over us. And I kind of feel like that's what we've been trying to get to today. And I hope that we've achieved that. And I hope that our listeners find empowerment in this conversation for themselves.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think that it's such a valuable conversation. And just like you, these circumstances do still come up for me. And so being able to talk through it and to give it light I think is beautiful, and I'm so deeply grateful that we got the opportunity to share from our hearts, from our heart-centered place, and to really give you the tools in your toolkit for you to be able to get through these moments. It's not that these moments don't happen or won't happen. They will, but that's okay, because now you can get through it. Afsheen, I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for each of you who listens and who finds value in this. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Oh, likewise, thank you. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come.